Here's the lesson, the revision lesson for secondary market research, and this at the moment can be used as an assessment or will be used as replacement coursework for if there's no exam. The 6-mark question, it's an extended answer response that's needed, and it will look like this based on a scenario. So let's look at the scenario. Damien is thinking of a different way in which to research the market for his candle making workshops. He needs to investigate whether there is a market for his workshops in the local area and how other craft companies are responding to these local market demands. He is considering secondary research specifically to investigate behaviour of his competitor companies. Evaluate which 2 methods of secondary market research Damien should use to ensure he can find out his local competition in the craft industry to which his candle making workshop company belongs. In your answer, you should include an analysis of the key advantages and disadvantages of using secondary market research to understand competitor behaviour, and a conclusion that recommends which research method would be the most effective for Damien. So let's look at what the question is actually asking us to do. Well, first of all, we need to look at the command word, evaluate. This command word is asking you to consider several options, ideas or arguments, and to come to a conclusion about which is the strongest, which is the most successful, and in this case, which is the most relevant as far as Damien and this candle making workshop is concerned. Then you need to be really clear on what the question is asking you to do, and in this case it's asking for 2 methods of secondary market research. So now you know you're evaluating, and you're evaluating 2 methods of secondary market research. Let's break down the nitty-gritty of what it is you've got to write about. Well, first of all, you need to choose your methods, and you need to discuss the advantages of your first choice. And as it's an evaluation, for the same method you need to discuss the disadvantages, normally aiming for between 2 and 3 disadvantages of each method. Then you're asked for 2 methods, so you go through the process again, this time the advantages of your second method. And like before, you need to do the disadvantages as well, remembering that for each you need to look at 2 to 3 advantages or disadvantages per method. And finally, it's the conclusion. It might be last, it's definitely not least. In fact, this is the one that can actually be the deciding paragraph for your overall mark. The conclusion needs to be your decision, and it's your decision of which is the right secondary research method for Damien, and it must have a justification in it as well. And here's a reminder of the rainbow bucket method we're going to use for extended writing. In the green bucket you will find all the advantages. In the yellow bucket you will find the disadvantages. In the purple bucket you will find the high value connectives that you can select. And last but no means least, it is the conclusion, and don't think that it's a smaller bucket that means it's less points. This is where you can get your killer points with your justification. Now here are the 6 methods of secondary research. Here's a reminder of what they all are and what they mean. Census information are population statistics that are usually taken every 10 years by the Office of National Statistics, which is a government department. Published reports contain individual company details from Companies House, which you can go to on the gov.uk site. Internal data, this is data information that a company holds on itself. These are things from sales from previous ad campaigns, or loyalty card data, that's a new one where the company can analyse their own customer buying habits, and even sales figures as well. That's internal data, and it's secondary because it will be historic reporting that's already been collected. Using the internet to research competition and reviews on the competition. Published accounts are produced by limited companies who have to produce their financial reports every year and publish them. And there's market reports. These are reports on market information which is usually gathered by things like which is a magazine that does lots of reviews of the whole market, or Mintel. So let's now look at the advantages and disadvantages of the secondary research. Now we've got a reminder of what each of the methods are. So here's a sample of advantages covering all the secondary research. And in the yellow bucket goes all the disadvantages for these 6 methods of secondary market research. So your job is to now pick 2 secondary market research methods and you need to evaluate them. So you need to choose 2 that are going to be relevant to Damien's candle making workshop. Now a candle making workshop clearly is a craft workshop, and in our local area where we've got a whole industry down by the River Severn that's all about crafts. So you've got to think of what type of information will be relevant to Damien. So we've got to actually select 2 of those 6. Not all of them are going to be relevant. So if you decide to say pick the internet, then what you've got to do is look through the advantages bucket, the green bucket, and which of those statements in the advantages bucket will actually be relevant to saying the good points from Damien's point of view. You then need to do the same from the yellow bucket, the disadvantages, and decide some of those statements are going to be relevant for him only in terms of his internet research. And don't forget, you need to repeat the process when you do your second method. And for your second method, for want of argument, you might want to say the census information is the right one to use, because that's going to give Damien an idea of how many people are in his local area who'd be interested in a craft workshop, because maybe it's not a teenage thing, maybe that's something that he knows, maybe it's an older market thing. So reviewing the census information will give him an idea. And what you then have to do is look into the advantages bucket and see what's relevant to the advantages in terms of using census information. And then you need to go through on the disadvantages, the yellow bucket, to look at which of those statements are relevant to you saying the disadvantages of using the census information. Now that is just an example of 2 methods. I'm not suggesting those are the 2 methods that you think are the best ones to choose. It's just a demonstration showing you that you pick them, and you've got to show how they're relevant to Damien. And not only do you show how the market research method will be relevant to him and his business, you've then got to select from each of the buckets which of the statements are most relevant. So now you've chosen your 2 market research methods, and you've been through the advantages bucket and the disadvantages bucket, and you've looked at your statements that you're going to use in your evaluation. We now need to look at how to put this piece of writing together. So this is the job of the purple bucket, the high value connectives. So what you need to do is you take one statement from your advantage and you look at a contrasting one from the disadvantages, and you need to put them together into an extended sentence using one of the high value connectives. Some in the bucket rather that are there, or maybe one that you've got in your own vocabulary. It's up to you, but we could do things like let's have a look at these advantages. If we looked at often no other resource available, so I'm going to, that statement for me links directly to the internet. So Damien could use the internet for his secondary market research method, because there's often no other resource available. There you go, connective. Looking at the yellow bucket, let's have a look. However, not all results published on the internet are made public, which could cause misleading views and give Damien inaccurate information. There you go. I've put the 2 statements together and I've put them in contrast with each other. So over to you now. You need to choose 2 of your methods, your secondary methods from the 6 below, and you need to, using your high value connectives, you are going to put the extended sentences together from the advantages and disadvantages, and I'd recommend 2 to 3 extended sentences per method. So that's 2 to 3 times 2 methods, so that's 6 sentences that you need to write. Remembering that Damien is looking to find the best research method to find out what the competitors are doing around him. But where's the fourth bucket, I hear you say? It is the conclusion bucket. As you would expect, here's some connectives which are generic to writing a conclusion. So let's look at how we approach the conclusion. Now the conclusion needs to be written by using competing points. That is that you take an advantage of, say, method 1, and to make a competing point about it, you actually then bring in the disadvantages of method 2. So that way you're showing that your choice of method 1 is the right choice because you contrast it directly with one of the negative points of method 2. That makes the competing point. To show you that you're evaluating it though, you could use a formulaic approach where you then go again to look at an advantages of that method and contrast it with a disadvantage over the other side. A good way to show you're evaluating though is now if you made the choice of method 1, say, what you then talk about is a disadvantage of the method you're choosing, and you link that to perhaps the advantage of the second method. Now the reason for doing that is that what you're then going to do, the competing point part to it, is that the disadvantage of your preferred method might be such a small risk that the benefits of the second method don't actually outweigh the risk. So that way what you're then doing is you're putting a downside to method 1 and going, well, it is negative, it isn't that good, but the good points of the second method aren't that big either though, so you do that contrast. And then what you do is you repeat that pattern, that crisscrossing, taking a good point of a method 1 and contrasting it with method 2. It's good to repeat that pattern till you get about 3 to 4 sentences, because the conclusion in these 6-point questions, the conclusion can make or break your final grade on this one. A good conclusion can see you staying in mark band 3 in the 5 to 6 points, whereas a conclusion maybe on 1 or 2 sentences, which is purely, I think this is the best one, as I've said, is an opinion, and that put you right down into the 1 or 2 points. So just to summarise again, it's a good idea to follow that pattern and repeat that pattern at least 3 times. Here's some Damien specific conclusion connectives for you to think about using as well. So that, my friends, is how to approach the 6-mark question. You follow the bucket method, the colour-coded buckets. So first of all, as a revision, you go through and do your advantages green and disadvantages yellow buckets and see which one you feel is the strongest for you, or see which are the strongest for you. Then you've got to remember the high value purple bucket, because those are your connectives, because you've got to link the two. It's all about linking and making sense. And then you nail it with the killer points on the conclusion, because you are making the decision for Damien, you're showing why it's a decision, and you're linking it back to the comments that you've made, and it's all beautifully justified. And your points are competing, that is to say that where you've got an advantage of one of the methods, then you contrast that directly with an advantage of the second method, or you have an advantage of the first method and you say the disadvantage of the second method because you want to discount it. So that's what we call a competing sentence, and it's the competing sentences will show the examiner just how truly amazing you are.